Paul Reed Smith. I got to go to their factory in Stevensville, Maryland for a private tour. Now this was incredibly exciting. I'm so honored I got to do this. Thank you to everyone at Paul Reed Smith who made it happen. I'm going to take you through every step of the guitar making process as I saw it. There is something though that was kind of interesting about this tour. I got to the end and I realized, hey, you know what? They left some things out. But stick around to the end of the video to figure out what it was that maybe I wasn't supposed to see on this tour. The entire process starts back in a loading dock. Now wood shows up from all over the world. They source it from just countless places that give the best quality for whatever type of guitar they're trying to make, or whatever piece of the guitar they're trying to make. Once they get that wood selected, they bring it to the factory and it's processed through what's called a rough cut. Now this is starting to form the pieces of wood into whatever it's going to be in the future, whether it's a neck or a body or a top or you name it. This is where the process begins. But the next step is where it really begins, and that's the drying process. There's a variety of different drying rooms that they have on site. Now these are all set to different temperatures and different times that the wood spends in there because there's an optimal range in which they want to bring the moisture content down to. This is kind of where the guitar stops being a tree and starts to become a musical instrument. It is probably the most important part of the process because if this isn't done right, it doesn't really matter what happens after. It doesn't matter how precise you are, how beautiful the guitar looks. If the wood isn't properly dried and prepped and allowed to acclimate, it's not going to make for a very stable or good guitar in the long run. After the wood's dried, we start the process of stick stacking. Now you can see that's pretty self-explanatory. You take whatever piece of wood you have and you stack it with sticks. This leaves air gaps in between each piece of wood so it can continue acclimating and drying and just getting ready to be turned into a guitar. Again, this process is a long process and it's the most important process. They've also got a set of color codes. Now these color codes start to indicate what line or what piece of the guitar that particular wood is going to be used for. You've got your S2, you've got your CE, you've got your core model. Those are all different varying levels of guitars that PRS produces in the US, and of course, you've got different wood that's going to be slotted for each one of those types of instruments. As the process continues, it starts to become a logistics project. Each day, you have a scheduler or somebody who's in charge of kind of the logistics of what wood they're going to need, who decides, hey, this is what we're going to build today. So they start to kit up different pieces of wood based on those color codes and get them ready to go out to the factory floor after they've been acclimated for the appropriate amount of time. One thing PRS is known for is certainly the look, especially on the tops of their guitars. Some incredible work is done with this wood, and one of those things is book matching. Now, PRS isn't the only company that does book matching, of course. What book matching is you basically take a optimal piece of wood, you cut it in half, and then you match those two pieces back up to get that incredible look of wood grain where it's almost such a continuous piece of wood that makes the top. Now they do make one-piece tops as well. It just depends on which guitar they're making. So after the wood is selected, prepped, maybe glued together and joined, these pieces go over to the point at which a guitar starts to form out of these pieces of wood. CNC machines are used to carve out the rough shape, the rough top carve, the cavities for pickups and electronics, and neck pockets on these bodies. What I found really interesting though is that these CNC machines are actually made for metalworking. So I'm not a CNC expert, but from what I understand, the metalworking machines are actually used for much tighter tolerance carving and shaping than your typical wood CNC machine. Now, wood is an organic material. It's not going to be quite the same as metal. You can probably get a lot more precise with metal, but PRS uses those metal machines with special custom bits on them for wood so that they can get much tighter tolerances. And if you've played any of the guitars, you know the fit and finish is just great. It starts with this process in the CNC machines. What's really incredible about these machines and the fact they have such tight tolerances is that the finished product that comes out, which is actually technically very unfinished, it's really a rough carve of the body, they are almost perfect when they come out of the machine. I mean, it looks like someone hand sanded them. Even the violin carve on some of the core McCarty guitars, for example, looks almost completely ready to go and finished, and a human hand really hasn't even touched them yet. This is just a CNC machine. So that's how you get the consistency out of making guitars in the 21st century. We're using technology that, of course, didn't exist 50 or 60 years ago. If it did, it was much rougher, and you had to do a lot more work by hand to get things into that nice, smooth, perfect shape that you want. But these machines really reduce the amount of effort and work that has to be put forth by the people in the next step. And that next step, of course, is body sanding. Now, what I found out here was really interesting. You can kind of graduate your way in. So if I were to go get a job there and I was somehow made it to the sanding process, I would probably start as a new person sanding the back of the guitars. Now, as you become more experienced and more skilled, you move on to the top, because clearly the top has many more contours, many more dips and holes and cavities and things to work around. So you want your more experienced people working on that. I found that really interesting, though, that there's like kind of a graduation process that goes through as to what part of the guitar you're allowed to work on. It's just awesome to see newer people, more experienced people working their way through each guitar that comes through the factory. Similarly, fretboards and necks have to go through the rough process, and then of course the finishing process. PRS is one of the few manufacturers that's still hand leveling fretboards. Now, this is labor intensive. It produces, though, a superior product, of course, because this is an age-old art form. You can do it with certain machines. You can do it, in a more maybe streamlined and efficient way, but when you have that human touch, because guitars are so vibrant and alive and just changing and dynamic, it really adds to the build itself. You have that expertise that's been put into one of the most important parts of the guitar, and that's the fretboard. We all know poor fretwork means it's just not going to work as far as a guitar goes. So you want someone or a process or a company who really knows what they're doing, and PRS is still doing that today with their fretboards. Now, the other really cool thing and very interesting thing to me was that the necks can take up to 18 days to process. This is again because they're making rough cuts which take off a ton of wood and get it into that basic neck shape, but then they wait and they wait and they wait and they wait and they let the wood acclimate and just become a neck, get used to being what it is. You've removed pieces of this block of wood, and that's inevitably going to cause it to twist and change and just adjust. Pretty incredible, and that's why it takes a while to make these things. I mean, there's a process involved, and they've got it down to a science, but just inevitably, some things take a long time. So once the rough process of the fretboard and neck has begun and has been completed and all the acclimation has taken place, it now goes over to another craftsperson who's going to put their hands on the neck and start to make it what we know it can be. I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to get some close-ups of the neck sanding process. Now, I was watching these people do their jobs, and it's just incredible the care, the detail that they take to ensure that each neck is made properly. And when you pick it up and you put your hand on the neck, because most of the time that's where the first tactile sense comes from when you pick up a guitar, is the neck. It's so cool to know that there's just any number of humans on the other side of this thing. Yes, they're machines that help make the guitars, but you've got these incredible people who have mastered such specific skills, even just down to certain parts of the guitars, that are making sure that the instrument you get is the best it can possibly be. Next, you go over to the neck and body assembly portion of the process. Now, as you can imagine, this is another very important step. If you don't get it right, the guitar is not going to be right. What they do at PRS for their set neck designs, which are many of, if not most, of their guitars, is they actually cut the pocket in the body for the neck just a little bit smaller than the neck portion that's going to be put into that section of the body. What this allows the technician who's doing this process to do is just ensure the tightest, most perfect fit possible. Yes, it requires some work. Yes, it is a difficult process, but by doing this, you're just ensuring for the life of the guitar that it's going to be rock solid at that joint, where you're taking two pieces of wood that were really never meant to go together and now joining them and kind of making a guitar finally. We've up until this point just had pieces of wood that were being carved into shapes that looked something like necks and bodies, but now you can really see the guitar taking shape. So at this point, you've got basically what is a guitar. Of course, it's missing a lot of things though, and one of the things it's missing is the finish that goes on it. And this process starts by filling the wood grain. Now you can see on some guitars, depending on how they're finished, their age, that wood grain can pop through the finish and it can look really cool sometimes. But so many of the Paul Reed Smith finishes have this incredible gloss to them, and they have just amazing colors and bursts and tones and different things, and you don't want wood grain necessarily showing through there. So the wood grain is then filled to prevent it coming through to the final finish. Sometimes they even take this opportunity to fill that grain with a different color. So that's how you get some of the amazing finishes where it just looks like marble almost coming through on a piece of wood. Now, if you have something like my Silver Sky, it's just a perfect glossy finish. And of course, you don't want the wood grain necessarily coming through that nitro finish. So that's where the fill comes in at this point. What was super cool about this portion of the tour is that it actually stops at a dividing line between the old factory and the new factory. Now, up until 2006, everything you see in this paint and finish fit area was the entire factory. Everything that you had to do for a PRS guitar was happening in this portion of the building. In 2006, they expanded with an almost 100,000 square foot addition to the original factory. Of course, that's because of demand. But it's really amazing to think that the whole process was completed in a building that was just less than a quarter of the size of what the building is today. And in this old section, that's where we continue on from the wood grain fill to the painting process. Now, we all know Paul Reed Smith finishes, if you've seen him in a guitar shop, they are striking. Doesn't matter what level of trim you're looking at, even down to the SEs that are not made in this factory, the finish always looks incredible. And this is where that takes shape. Yes, we start with the wood grain fill, but when they start to apply those top coats and those finishing coats to the bodies and necks, that's where the magic really comes in. Now, you might notice there are people in paint suits painting guitars, but there's also a robot, and that's a relatively new addition to the PRS process for painting. Again, this goes back to the CNC machines. It's about consistency. It's about quality control, and that base coat being just absolutely perfect from a robot really helps the entire finished product be that much more solid and have the longevity and the consistency that you would want in guitar finishes. After the paint process, you go to the final cleanup and fret leveling and buffing. It's all of the stuff that really just kind of tidies up the work that's been done thus far. But you can see there's no electronics in the guitar yet. That's coming next. This process, though, is very important when it comes to quality control. This is where they're going to catch any imperfections or different things they might want to go back and fix with the guitar's finish. And that does happen. That's okay. They take it back. They do whatever they need to do to repaint or rebuff or whatever it is in the finish that they find that's just not exactly the way they want it. They fix it and they resend that guitar back into the process. It's really cool to see the attention to detail and quality that PRS has at this stage of the process. Now, I had to ask, if you've picked up a guitar and you looked at the back of the headstock, you see the serial numbers written, yes, literally written on the back of the PRS headstocks. And I said, are those really written? Because I mean, the handwriting is just incredibly consistent. So I'm imagining maybe it's some type of a font that they've created to kind of make it look like somebody's writing that on there. Come to find out, it's actually the same person who's been doing this for more than a decade. They handwrite every serial number on the back of every US-made PRS guitar. It's amazing. It's a personal touch that I found to be super cool, super interesting. And I just thought back to my Silver Sky sitting back here in Michigan with the handwriting in the back of the headstock. I'm like, that person is here. They wrote on my guitar, the guitar that I actually own today. It's really cool to have that connection back to the people in the factory, and also to know that it's one person. That's how they get the consistency. That handwriting is just unmistakable. If the handwritten serial number isn't enough, each guitar does have a barcode. This is sort of like the birth certificate of the guitar. If you were to scan this barcode into PRS's system, it's gonna tell you everything about the guitar. It's gonna tell you what was ordered on it, every different option that the dealer or customer requested, and when it was made, what the paint code was, all of the above. It is just the lifeline to what the guitar is, what it was, and where it came from. Very cool to think that if you tore your guitar apart, which I'm not gonna do just to find the serial number, but if I did, it's in there. They could scan it, they could tell me all sorts of stuff about when the guitar was made, what went into it. The whole thing is stored in that digital barcode. So you get both the kind of analog Super cool vintage personal touch of somebody writing on your guitar with the serial number as well as the year it was made. But then you get the futuristic barcode birth certificate that contains everything you could possibly ever want to know about the guitar as well. From here, electronics are installed. Of course, you're not going to be able to hear the electric guitar if you don't add the electronics. That happens at this stage, and we're kind of off to the races. We're getting very close to having a finished product. Once the electronics are installed, it goes through some more inspections and then eventually goes to setup. Now, this is where you're going to intonate the guitar, set the action, check and make sure that it actually functions as a musical instrument, because that's what it is. It's going to look great at this point, but none of that matters if it doesn't play and sound the way that it should. So after the electronics are installed, we have basically what looks like a finished guitar, but it has to be set up. Now, this is the point where all of the other steps in the process come together. If they weren't done right, it's going to make this person's job very difficult or impossible in certain situations if there's something just inherently wrong with the guitar. So, quality control process all the way through is going to be tested, and if all goes as planned, and it does 99.9% of the time at PRS, the person setting up the guitar, setting the intonation, the action, and doing the final checks is going to have a relatively easy time because the guitar was made correctly. So once this process is done to the spec that PRS specifies for each individual model, you've got a finished guitar that's ready to be buffed, inspected one more time, and thrown in a case and shipped out to you, the customer, or if you're a dealer or a store, wherever the case may be, it's ready to go. It's a finished product and it's ready to make music, which is the whole point of all of this. Now, of course, the SE guitars are not made in this factory. They're made overseas, but there is something incredibly unique that PRS does for their quote-unquote cheaper models. If you go upstairs in the warehouse, there's a whole section where every guitar that is made outside of the US comes to the Maryland factory. They're opened, they're inspected, anything that needs to be adjusted or fixed is done. They get put back in their case, and then they are ready to go out to dealers, stores, and customers. This step in the process is pretty incredible, and I don't know of anybody else who does this. They could absolutely take these guitars that are made overseas and just ship them direct from those factories to dealers, to stores, and they're going to go out to customers like that. And they're probably going to be okay, because a lot of those dealers do their own inspections and setups and things like that. But Paul Reed Smith wants each of those guitars to come through the factory in Maryland. It's just that extra bit of care that you get with a company like this. And I really do attribute it to the people who work there, all the way from the top down. They didn't pay me to say that, but it's just the sense that I got while I was there. People care about what they're doing, and it comes across in the instruments, and it even comes across in the SE instruments that are not made there, but inspected and shipped to the rest of the world from Maryland. Now, there was one part of the process that I was not able to see, and I thought maybe, did we just skip it by accident? Was I not paying attention? I was kind of overwhelmed and excited about what was going on, so I guess it's entirely possible that I just totally missed this part of the tour, but it's the pickups. Pickups. They make pickups right there at the factory for all of these US-made PRS guitars. By the time I realized this, I was on a plane home, so I decided, you know what, I'm going to email them and ask, hey, how come I didn't get to see the pickup portion of the tour? I think we missed something. Well, it turns out it wasn't an accident. They purposely skipped this portion of the tour because there's proprietary things they didn't want me to see, nor do they want other people who have cameras. They're going to put this stuff on the internet to see, because, I mean, there's kind of a magic that goes into making pickups, and PRS pickups are no different. I happen to really like their pickups, so I would have been interested to know how they do it. However, I get it. You've got people out there who are competition. They want to be able to figure out how they get those sounds. They want to figure out what the process is, and they show a lot on the factory tour that they gave me. So I totally understand that. There's a part of the process that they just can't reveal, and that's the pickups. I would have loved to have seen it. But hey, you know what? I don't want to cause any problems for PRS, and I'm sure PRS doesn't want me to cause any problems for them. I am so appreciative of the fact that they even let me get into the building to see the front where they had some gear and things in the lobby. I would have been happy with just that, to be honest with you, but I was actually able to go on this tour. I got time in their recording studio to check out a couple of their guitars. I'll link those videos in the description below. It was an amazing opportunity. So that's it. If you want to support the channel, please check out the links in the description below. Some of those are affiliate links, and if you buy anything, they help me out. The easiest way and the cheapest way to help me is to subscribe, hit that like button, and of course, leave a comment in the comment section on this or any one of my other videos, and I will see you in the next one.